Hi, friends. Welcome to the Hey Fundraiser podcast. I'm your host, Mary Hackett, and whether you are a frontline fundraiser, the operations professional, a board member, or just someone wanting to make an impact in your community, this podcast is for you. We cover all facets of fundraising, and our main objective is to give you ideas and inspiration to help you raise more money. Join us as we grow, learn, and make an impact together. Hey, fundraiser. Today we're going to talk about failure. It's not easy to talk about failures because most people don't want to put out to the world that they have failed at something. But here's the deal. Failure is only failure if you don't learn something from that failure. I'm pretty sure Henry Ford said that. As fundraisers, we have a goal, and come hell or high water, we strive to meet that goal. None of us like missing our targets, but failure in fundraising can mean more than just not meeting your goals. It could be that you lost an important relationship with a donor, or that one of your fundraising efforts tanked, or that your organization now doesn't have the needed money to fulfill its mission. Failure for fundraisers is a big deal. So before we get into some of my failures, which I am cringing over, but I'm going to share because I feel like I'm in safe space, here are some of my favorite quotes about failure. And this keeps me grounded in the fact that everybody fails at some point. Thomas Edison said, quote, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Love that. Winston Churchill said, quote, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." And Ellen DeGeneres said, quote, "It's failure that gives you the proper perspective on success." And I personally think all three of those are true. And it is in that spirit today that I'm going to share some of my failures with you. I just don't want you to make the same mistakes that I did. So I'm hoping that these stories help you avoid some of the pitfalls that I have fallen into over the years. Now, I've actually been putting off this podcast for a while now because I don't want to talk about my failures. I barely want to think about them. In fact, I've put this podcast off for so long that in a way, it's become its own failure. It's ironic, but here we are. Now, we've all made some mistakes as we learned fundraising, like not asking permission to ask for a gift, asking for a gift too soon, or not asking for the right amount, or talking when we should be listening, all these things. We need those experiences because we learn and we grow from them. I'm going to share with you 3 stories today that are kind of bigger failures, and I'm hoping that this is a judgment-free space. So, here it goes. Okay, story number 1. It really is about letting down some donors by not thanking them properly. So when I was a young, inexperienced fundraiser, I began soliciting for mid-level gifts, like $2,500 up to $10K. This was my intro to later going on to major and principal gifts. So I started this job. My solicitations were going well initially. I was asking the right people. I was working my portfolio. I was having success. Lower level annual donors were upgrading to the mid-level givers, and the money was coming in. So my first year on the job, it was going really well. Then a year later, I began to go out and renew some of those donors, and I began to be turned down. My first 3 solicitations out, I heard the same statement from each donor. They told me that we had had such a great original meeting last year, and then after they made their gift, that they didn't really hear from me that much. Cringe, and they were right. Although I did send a handwritten thank you note, I didn't call. I didn't report back the impact that their gift had made. I did send a holiday card, but that's not as warm and fuzzy as like true stewardship. Like, oy vey, so absolutely cringeworthy. In my mind, they made their gift, they were thanked, and then that was it. But this was a good lesson in stewardship. You cannot thank a donor enough. Like, no donor is going to say to you, "You can stop thanking me now." It's just not going to happen. It's so important that we as fundraisers understand the practice of receiving and accepting gifts. Now, I know this sounds silly, But I once had a conversation with my mom about receiving gifts. When I would buy her a present, she would always say, "You didn't need to do that," or "You shouldn't have." And that is very dismissive. And I didn't realize it until I became a fundraiser. It was almost like she didn't want the gift. I had done essentially the same thing to my lovely donors. We as fundraisers can never say things like that. We need to accept gifts. We need to thank our donors multiple times over multiple months, communicate with them about the impact and importance of their involvement, and understand that when we accept gifts, we need to accept the responsibility of stewarding that gift and that donor. I learned a lot from being turned down. Now, I did, of course, work to mend those relationships. And I'll tell you what, I have been a stewardship proponent ever since. Okay, mistake number 2. When I was living in Seattle, I was working for a facilities-based organization. There were facilities all over the greater Seattle area. I'd been in the job for about a year, and things were going well. I had a $5 million goal. Things were good. One day, my CFO came to my office and sat down in the chair that was like right next to my desk. And he looked like he had seen a ghost. He'd only been in the job for maybe 6 or 8 months, but he proceeded to tell me that the organization had $7 million of debt from unfinished capital campaigns. When I started at the organization a year before this, they had just finished a couple different capital campaigns, right? It's a facilities-based organization. But I was told that those campaigns were concluded and fully funded. Well, it turns out that wasn't exactly true. There was $1 million from one campaign that just never was realized. There was a couple $100,000 over here and a couple $100,000 over here and $100,000 over here. And then all of a sudden, my CFO is asking me what I'm going to do about this $7 million in debt. This is debt I didn't know about. I didn't have a plan for it. Over the next couple months, I worked with my CEO to figure out a plan to raise money for debt, which is not easy, by the way. The entire community thought that these buildings were funded. I mean, there were ribbon cuttings, grand openings, press releases, and now a couple years later, here I come saying, hang on, it's actually not finished. I ended up raising about $1 million, but I was turned down 90% of my solicitation. Funding debt is not sexy. It's very difficult, and I failed in raising the money. They needed a fundraiser who specialized essentially in debt relief and packaging that for donors. And there are fundraisers out there, they're very brilliant people who do specialize in this. Unfortunately, I was not one at the time. I also failed in 2 other ways. I mean, not raising the money, that was one thing. But here's the other ways. First, I didn't seek counsel, and I should have. I needed a thought partner, and it really wasn't going to be my CEO, who was the one who didn't finish all these capital campaigns. I truly believe that if I would have had a strategy partner, like a consultant, I maybe could have messaged things differently and solicited very differently. And I just didn't do it. The second failure was taking my CEO on solicitations. So my CEO felt like he needed to be involved in raising the money because he was ultimately responsible for the debt that had just been building up over these years. We sat down with dozens of prospects and donors, and depending on the prospect, he would make the ask or I would make the ask. But here's what happened. When I made the ask, many donors would respond with something like this. Mary, I would commit a gift, but how do I know that the CEO won't go rack up millions of dollars in debt again? Gulp. He was sitting right there next to me. Oh my gosh. I should not have taken him with me on solicitations because he just got slaughtered in every single meeting. Sorry, I just broke out into a cold sweat just thinking back on these meetings. They were so horrendous. But here's the deal. It matters who is in the room with you. Choose wisely when you are soliciting. Okay, one more failure, because why not? We're already in awkward space together. We're going to forge ahead. So the last failure that I want to share with you today, and just know there are many others, is not knowing how to manage a no or a not yet when in a solicitation meeting. So early in my major gift career, there was a donor who gave $25,000 every March. She had done this for the last 8 consecutive years. She was a new relationship to me as I had just kind of taken her in on my portfolio. We'd had a couple coffee dates. I had a good relationship with her, and it was time to ask her for her annual March gift. The meeting was set. I was feeling really good about it. In fact, in my mind, it was a bit of a layup. Like this was her normal behavior. I wasn't asking her for anything out of the ordinary. We sat down in her living room. We shared some pleasantries. We talked about how much she loved the organization that I was working for, and it came time to do the ask. So I did. I asked her for $25,000 and then sat quietly. So she thought for a minute, and then she said, actually, now is not a good time. I was completely frozen. In my head, I was thinking through every detail, like, it is March, right? It was March. The amount was $25,000, right? Yeah, okay. She does love the organization. Like, what have I done wrong? I just couldn't respond. I just felt like it was such a layup, and it wasn't. It took me a second, 5 seconds, to really collect myself. And what I did was I quickly ended the meeting and just kind of skedaddled out of there. I didn't know how to handle the situation, but I knew that I never wanted to be in that situation ever again. I sent her a thank you note for the meeting, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. Because of this one meeting, I went on like a 2-year quest. It was a journey to really dig into how to never put myself in that situation again. So today, I have 3 questions I keep in my back pocket in case someone is teetering or says no. In fact, I recently recorded a podcast on this. I'm going to link that podcast in the show notes. So March comes and goes, April comes and goes, and we enter May. Now, I had still been in touch with her. I just left the meeting early and a little bit awkward. Well, mid-May, her $25,000 gift arrived in the mail. I was shocked, so I picked up the phone, wanted to check in with her. I asked her if she had changed her mind about the gift, and she said, no, not at all. It just turned out she had a hefty tax bill that year that she needed to pay by April 15th, and that just tied up some of her funds. She said that now that was behind her, she was ready to get back to her philanthropic pursuits. Now, here's how I failed in this situation. First and foremost, I didn't agree to next steps with her. In the meeting before the solicitation, I should have let her know that the next time I was going to see her, that I had planned on soliciting her and just kind of made sure she was on board. Most likely, she probably would have said, hey, I'm having some cash flow issues, and can we push the meeting back to later in the year? Easy breezy. Second failure, I didn't gently probe into why March wasn't a good time. She said, actually, it's not a good time. And I said, okay, thanks, bye. I was just so taken aback that I ended the meeting and ran to the safety, the warmth of my office. If I would have asked her, is there a better time for you to make this gift? She probably would have told me, yeah, maybe later in the spring would be better as I need to manage some unexpected expenses. It could have been that easy, and I didn't do it. I didn't have the skill. I did so much soul searching. It was a lot of heartbreak for me, even asking myself, am I in the right career? I mean, this woman had made a $25,000 gift. This was the 9th consecutive year in the same month. And how did I botch this up? It didn't need to be like that. Sometimes the timing isn't right, and we can't make assumptions that because someone makes a gift every March, that they're always going to make the same gift at the same time every year. Okay, fundraiser, 3 failures that I hope help you to not do the same thing that I did. With every fundraising failure I faced, I did learn a lot, I have to say. And my hope for you is that you look at failure in a similar way. And it's not easy, but again, failure is only failure if you don't learn anything. One last quote from an anonymous source, but this one, it really hits home for me, and I hope you keep it in your pocket as you go on to have many successes and failures in fundraising. So here it is. Never let success get to your head. Never let failure get to your heart. So fundraiser, you are more than any failure, and you can and will overcome any and every obstacle you face. Okay, fundraiser, see you next time. Hey Fundraiser, thanks so much for being here today. Did you know that we create a special page for each episode that has helpful links, episode highlights, standout quotes, and freebies? Check it out in today's episode description. If you loved what you heard today, would you kindly give us a rating and review? It really helps other fundraising professionals find our Hey Fundraiser community. I'm Mary Hackett, and thank you for listening.